be covering one of the most famous episodes in the life of Jesus, his parable about the prodigal son, and we found that in chapter 15 of Luke's Gospel, 11 to the 32nd verse. We read as follows. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a share of the property that falls to me. And so he divided his living between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took his journey into a far-off country, and there he squandered his property on loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in that country, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of those citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the swine. And he would have gladly fed on the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything to eat. But when he had come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to eat and to spare? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise, and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And so he rose and came to his father. But while he was yet a distance, his father saw him, had compassion, ran up to him, embraced him, and kissed him tenderly. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer to be worthy called your son. But the father said to the servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and make merry. For this son of mine was dead, and now he is alive again. And so, he who was lost is found, and they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came near and drew the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. And he called one of his servants and asked him, what was this meant? And he said to him, your brother has come back, and your father has killed the fatted calf for him, because he has received him safe and sound. But he was very angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, lo, these many years I have served you, and I have never once disobeyed any of your commands. Yet you never gave me so much as a kid goat that I could celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours comes, who has devoured your living with harlots, you kill the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But it is fitting to make merry and to be glad, for this brother of yours was dead, is now alive. He was lost and is found. The context of the prodigal son parable given to us by Jesus in Luke's gospel. Luke's gospel fundamentally is a gospel meant for the outsider, for the Gentile, for the non-Jew. And so what we have here is Jesus' understanding of the compassion of God as that compassion of God is addressed to the outsider, or in a real sense, the outlaw, one who lives outside Torah, which is God's law given by God to Moses, and Moses to the great assembly, and then from the great assembly to the children of Israel. Let's go through the text. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said, Father, give me the share of the property that falls to me. First of all, in the Semitic understanding of things, in the law of primogenitorship, it's the eldest son that has a right to property. The younger son has no right whatsoever. And so when the younger son tells his father, Father, give me a share that would have been mine when you have died. He's acting as if the father is in fact already dead. He has treated him with absolute disrespect, which is a violation of God's Torah and God's mitzvot, or law, coming from God's holy word. He is treating his father as if he's already dead. I don't care about you. You are absent from my life. You simply do not exist. And now I want you to give me what is owed me. Well, first of all, by the law of primogenitorship, you don't get anything. And what does the father do? And he divided his living between them. First of all, in the ancient world, land was everything. Remember Genesis 17, where the promises that God gives to Abraham, which begins the covenant that God has with Israel. I will be your God, you will be my people, you'll own the land, and you'll have many descendants. You will own the land. Land was everything. Without land, you were nothing. And the land that would have been in the father's estate would have been in his family's name for generations. You never sell land. And what we have here is the youngest son who owns nothing but demands everything, treats his father with absolute disrespect, says, give me a share which befalls to me. Well, it doesn't befall to you, not at all. What does the father do? He divides his living between them. Now, not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took his journey to a far-off country, and there he squandered his property in loose living. First of all, for the Jew, the land of Israel, the Eretz Israel, the land of promise, the land of plenty, the land of blessing, you don't leave Israel. At the time of Jesus, the children of Israel would have known what it meant to be in bondage, in servitude to other people. So to leave the land of plenty, of goodness, and of blessing is to show contempt of, first of all, not only for your father, for your family, for your village, for your land, but contempt for God himself. Why? You are denying the blessing that God has given you through your ancestorship. What does he do? He goes off to a Gentile territory with foreigners. What does he do? He breaks the Torah. Again, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the rabbis centuries later codified the Torah into 613 mitzvot, or laws. You are a good Jew insofar as you heard the Torah, which is God's will, God's word within your life, took it to your heart, you listen, you obey. You hear the word, you live. Disregarding the Torah means disregarding your entire human existence as under God's law, God's favor, and obviously God's sonship. So he squandered all his personal property on loose living. And when everything is spent, notice everything is spent. He doesn't have enough sense to save. When everything is spent, a great famine arose in that land, and he began to be in want. Now, this is interesting. Notice famine outside of Israel, great want. If you're in Israel, no famine, blessing, and the plenitude that comes from strict observance of God, Torah, and covenant. What happens? So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out into the fields to feed the swine. Now, first of all, because of kosher law, the world is split in two, The world is split in two. What you can taste, touch, and handle, what you cannot taste, touch, and handle. Jew and Gentile, the goyim, the Gentile, they're outsiders. Again, Jesus in Luke's gospel wants to paint the worst case scenario, the worst case abandonment by God, to show his audience that somehow, even in your worst case scenario, God is still God, you are still son and or daughter by covenant and by design. Worst case scenario, what is he doing now? He's feeding the pigs. Not only that, what happens? He would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. This is where the Gentile who does not have the Torah, one thing about the Torah, it's God's manifestation of his will through human speech, through human articulation, and his word brings life and blessing. There's a certain ethicality in belief, how you treat people. And of course, the two fundamental cardinal virtues within Judaism are justice and mercy. Well, in the intertestamental Judaism at the time of Jesus, we find that there is an ethical component to belief. God is an ethical God. So when you hear his word, you act ethically. What happens? When you leave the land of blessing, go to Gentile land, they do not have the Torah. The Jews believed because of the Torah of God, they were ethically superior. So the Gentiles did not feed foreigners. So here he is, outside of Israel, outside of plenty, blew his entire estate on loose living, violation of the Torah. He's dead broke, so he has to what? Hire himself out to non-Jews, to a Gentile. And then what does the Gentile ask him to do? Feed the pigs. And what's worse, Jesus is painting the worst case scenario. He would have gone right down into the swill and eat pig food because no one gave him anything. No one gave him anything. So ethically superior is God's Torah. Because God's Torah says, even the alien in your land must be treated justly, fairly. You must give him something to eat. But this is Gentiles. They don't have the ethical reality of God's Torah. What happens? It happens when you're down eating with the pigs, when there's no other option, grace is bestowed. Grace, in the Hebrew mind, the word chesed, God's tender, loving mercy. What happens? You come to your senses. And he says to himself, I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And in the Greek here, and he arose and came to his father. In the Lucan narrative, especially in Luke Acts, we find that the Greek word Agerion means to arise. And within that particular context, it means rising from the dead. Not only does it mean to get better or to have a metanoia or change of life, it means you rise from the dead. And by breaking the Torah, the younger son is as dead as a doornail. The son comes to his senses. Notice, he came to himself. That's a great line. He came to himself. He was living a life outside of himself, outside Torah, outside blessing, outside the ethicality that is demanded of you by belief. Okay? So what happens? Well, he goes back. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a far distance, his father saw him and had compassion. Tender, loving mercy. And he ran, notice, he ran, embraced him tenderly, and kissed him. Potentates of the Eastern Mediterranean or the mid-Eastern realities, the son that would have horribly disfigured the relationship of father and son. His father is that Semitic potentate, a large estate, many hands, many fields, many people, many servants. If you would have so disrespected your elders, you would have been called back. He would have come to you and he would have put his foot upon you, and you would have been a footstool. He would have never left the house. But in Luke, Jesus has the Father leaving. He doesn't walk to the Son. He runs to the Son, embraces him, kisses him tenderly. And the son says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. How does the father respond? Since the son has repented, there is no reproach. There is no rebuke whatsoever. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly, notice quickly, the best robe. It's a throwback to Joseph and his multicolored robe, the youngest son. Bring the best robe. Put it on him. He's now being invested with the things that he has lost. Put it on and put a ring on his hands. The ring represents the resumption of status within his own village, within his own family. And put shoes on his feet. Slaves wore nothing. There's a certain dignity in restoration. There is a certain primordial dignity when you recognize who and what you are, change, and by the grace of God, come to your senses. Full restoration is in fact given back to you. Yeah? So at this point, they kill the fatted calf. Let us eat and make merry, for this son of mine was dead. See, the son was dead. When you're outside land, property, family, village, the very reality that makes Israel, you're dead. And when you disfigure your life by disobedience to the Torah, you are rotting. You become an arch-contaminating agent. Anything you touch dies. But now, my son is now alive. He was lost, notice, outside of Israel, and now he's found back to Israel. And they began to make merry. What happens? Part 2. That's why many scholars believe that Luke's gospel of the prodigal son is not simply about the prodigal son, it's about the eldest son. Those who are righteous by following God's holy law. What is the relationship between those who follow God's holy law and those that do not? Don't forget, this parable is directed to the Pharisees, who held others in contempt because they were unable to fulfill the dynamic mitzvot of God's Torah. Now, his elder son was in the field. Notice, he's working. The rest are having fun. And he came and drew near to the house, and he heard the sound of music and dancing. And he called out to one of his servants and asked, what was this about here, huh? And he said to him, you can just hear the tenor of speech. Your brother is back. The one that disrespected you and your father. He's back in town. Your brother has come back, and your father has killed the fatted calf of him because he has received him safe and sound. What is the response of the eldest son? He is furious. He's angry and refused to go in. Now, again, you are having a family get-together. It is the height of disrespect not to be partaking of a ceremony, of a party, of a meeting that's held in your family's honor. The son refuses to go into the house. That's a horrible sign of disrespect. What does the father do? His father came out and what? Entreated him, begs him to come in. Again, the father will allow himself to empty himself of his paternal prerogative in order to bring someone very dear to him back to himself. And so what happens? But he answered his father, lo, these many years I have served you. I have never disobeyed your command, and yet you never gave me so much as a kid goat that I might marry with my friends. Interesting here. Look at the son's reproach. Lo, these many years I have served you. Yes. Was that a difficulty? Don't forget, everything I have is yours. It all belongs to you anyway. Lo, these many years I worked for you. Namely, I've been just, I've been truly obedient here. And I've never disobeyed your mitzvot, or I've never disobeyed your command. You can see the Pharisees saying, we are the just ones. We are the just ones. And yet, you never gave me such as a kid goat that I might celebrate with my friends. The presumption is you should have read my mind. You should have understood my own personal needs. You should have given it to me without me even asking you, that I might make Mary and my friends. You're throwing a party for this son of yours? What about me? But when your son of yours came, who has devoured all your living with harlots, you killed a fatted calf for him. Notice, look at that line here. When this your son came back, notice he doesn't call him his brother. He's your son, he's not my brother. Very interesting language here. Very interesting. Anyway, for him you killed the fatted calf, the one that we've been saving for a great celebration. How does the father respond to this? He said to him, son, notice, son, even though you've shown me disrespect, you're still my son. I still wish the best for you. Son, you are always with me. Wonderful line. You're always with me. What do you mean? And all that is mine is yours. Didn't you understand that when I divided the property? It's yours. It's always been yours. You're always with me. You didn't have to ask. Why did you think less of me? Huh? Why did you think less of me? Did you not know that it's all yours anyway? It is fitting, notice, it is fitting, it's right, it's just. It's fitting to make merry and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is now alive. He's lost and was found. The point here that Jesus wants to indicate is, look, the issue isn't sin. The issue isn't disrespect. The issue isn't alienating yourself from God. The issue is repentance, coming to your senses. That's the issue. And Jesus wants to say, this is the worst case scenario. And yet, the Father welcomes both of them back. When we talk about the mercy of Christ, understand something. Mercy and compassion of Jesus does not mean that we become a doormat for someone else's misconduct. On the contrary, when there's the ability to forgive, that's power. When there's the ability to show mercy, that is strength. So being faithful about who and what you are to another who is harming you in some way, you are exercising the dignity and expression of who and what you are. Mercy never denies your personal dignity and the expression of that reality. Being merciful does not mean allowing things to persist. Being merciful does not mean we are doormat for someone else's misconduct. The mercy of God demands that we see ourselves made in His image and likeness, and nothing should ever deter anyone from besmirching that dignity that God alone has wonderfully given you. Some scholars say the prodigal son deals with the youngest son. Some say no, it deals with the eldest son. Some scholars say it deals neither with the eldest son nor the younger son, but with the father. It all depends on how you want to place the emphasis. One thing for sure, if in fact in the Lucan narrative, in the mind of Jesus, the Father is God, that is the God image, then what type of God do we have? He will desecrate His own self for the sake of His creation. That's how much He loves us, huh? That's how much He loves us. He will lessen Himself in order that we might come to our senses. The point being, there is not one moment of your existence that's ever devoid of God's presence. And when you fall from the mark or miss the mark, there's always the opportunity of coming back. There's nothing that you can do to radically alienate yourself from God to the point that God will never take you back. But you have to come to your senses so that mercy is given. So is this parable about the prodigal son? Is it about the eldest son? Is it about God? One thing it is about, it's about our relationship to a God that says, you're welcome home. Even when you sin boldly and bravely, with contempt, when you come to yourself, come to your senses, you're always welcome back. All too often we get bogged down by our own personal imperfections or issues or proclivities, and we say, you know, God, I pray to you constantly and I see no difference in my life. Well, you gotta understand that when you're ready to really respond to the gift of God, which is grace, grace is God's life in you, when you're ready to clearly receive the gift, your life will change. And not 1 second before. When you take God seriously, when you look at your life seriously, you say, I'm a fallen person. Do I take accountability and responsibility for my life? At that point, you say, God, come into my life. Please come into my life. And I can assure you, when you take that seriously, He will, and He does. Okay?